first episode of KSP Naval Academy. I am your instructor, Camulus777. I created this series because I wanted to go over some of the cool things that we can do with tactics in KSP for player versus player combat. I am using Macey Dean's battle rules. You can find those in his series. The episode specifically was Battle for Lathe. Wonderful episode, really entertaining. It's where he pits his Spirit Wolf fleet, including the Spirit of Kerbal, against a Handland fleet. There are a few things that I probably would have done differently had I'd been fighting in the battle, but I think he did an overall good job based on the fact that he was grossly outgunned. This episode I wanted to dedicate to the carrier. Now, a lot of people think that the spaceborne carrier is kind of useless because you're not dealing with two different types of vehicles as you are on a ship carrying planes. You're dealing with a large spaceship carrying a whole bunch of smaller spaceships, and some people actually think that it's pointless because the larger spaceship will just be able to blow them up because you'll just hit them with lasers that travel faster than those smaller ships, and maneuverability really doesn't matter much when you're throwing something the speed of light at your target. I have to disagree completely. I actually think that the carrier will be still be the center point of a space-based battle, and here's why. A carrier does carry just pretty much smaller ships, but all those smaller ships combined make a really large ship. Although if you destroy one of the smaller ships, or half the smaller ships, you just lose part of your weapons and part of your fleet. You don't lose the whole entire thing in one big shot, because if weapons are really supposed to be that powerful, you know, if you spread them out enough, one nuke takes out one fighter. And which one costs more? Probably the nuke. At least I'd hope so. Now, modern-day carriers are still based upon this principle. They're a platform for smaller, more maneuverable craft to launch off from, drop a whole bunch of ordnance, come back, refuel, get more ordnance, and drop a whole bunch more ordnance. Meanwhile, the carrier sits safely at a far away, at a good distance, and that's the point of a carrier, is to ensure its own safety. It has defense craft. It has a decent amount of crew on board to, if needed, invade. So it's a mobile base. And the idea of a mobile base, I don't think will ever disappear. In KSP, there's a lot of things that we can do with a mobile base. We're going to go over them. As we've seen in sci-fi, take the Saratoga from Space Above and Beyond, for instance. It carries several squadrons of Hammerhead fighters. And, the physics were really wrong in that show, and how fighters operate in space. But still, the concept is the same. I think it's more like Babylon 5. I mean, that's the closest thing that I've ever seen to reality in space combat. Long-range weapons at hundreds or thousands of kilometers. Still using missiles, beam weapons that are or directed energy weapons. The fighters are designed as small spaceships. They don't bank like aircraft. They bank like spaceships. The Star Fury is just a brilliant design. Can spins on its axis and can do a lot of cool things. Now we're going to take a lot of these design concepts, parts of each, and implement them in our design today. Now there are a few things that a carrier should have. For one, of course, it should be able to carry smaller craft. The craft that I have designed for are under 10 tons each. Those are the light fighters, and then I've got two larger attack fighters that I'm going to put on there that are about 25 tons. And then I'm actually going to implement some drones. Now these drones are going to be the defensive force. My attack force are going to be the light fighters and the bombers. But the drones are going to be my defensive force, and then also some sort of scouting. I don't know if Macey's going to implement scouting, and, you know, how important it is to know where your enemy is, but it would be cool, because that's, you know, that's a fun avenue that you can go around, hiding behind moons and up against the radiation of Joule, because it's gas giant, those types of things. Now, another thing the carrier should have is, of course, crew to operate your fighters, and separate. I mean, you don't just want your crew sitting in your fighter, because if a fighter gets destroyed, you lose your crewman. And then also, it should have a lot of fuel. The Spirit of Kerbin actually has a lot of fuel. Let's see, it has like 22 of those standard size long tanks, and I think it's like 7,500 units of fuel, which is pretty decent. I mean, you can go to lathe. My carrier, I think it's going to have a tad more than that. I'm going to be about the same tonnage, but I have a lot more engines too, because I really want my thrust, the opportunity to have my thrust up, in case I need to run away. Because if there's one thing a carrier is really good at, it's kiting. You can try to catch me, and as you're barely closing in, maybe, my fighters are coming at you with, you know, attack after attack after attack, and they're going to either want to cripple you or destroy you. And these are the tactics. You do not want your carrier in the middle of a battle. You don't want it to be, it's the centerpiece, but you don't want it to be in the center. You want it to be very far away from battleships and battlecruisers and destroyers and, you know, all these different heavy hitting types. And that's the only thing I think I would have done differently for Macey, was I wouldn't put the Spirit of Kerbin in the battle. I would have launched from a moon, rather than launch from the middle of the battle. For one thing, I would have been able to have all my fighters out, and two, I probably wouldn't have lost it if I'd left a few fighters, or if I'd left at least one escort craft. I probably wouldn't have lost it. Would have been able to do tons and tons of damage still. But then again, it's, you know, the battle went as well as it could have. You really can't change those things. And I think he still did a very, very good job. So, I wanted to talk about a little bit in history what carriers were used for, and if this bores you and you just want to go straight for the, you know, the build, you can go ahead and skip it. And I'm going to go over one of my favorite battles in history, and I think that's the pinnacle of carrier combat, which is the Battle of Midway. You've got 4 Japanese carriers versus 3 American carriers. And a lot of people don't know this, but there was also a Japanese battle group behind the carriers, waiting for the American carriers to get close enough so they could use their guns and blow the crap out of them. Of course, this actually didn't happen in Midway, but you see the effectiveness of an aircraft carrier mobile platform, and you can see how dangerous it can be, really, against battleships and other carriers and bases. Now, Midway is a small island, and it's actually midway between Japan and the United States. And the idea was that the Japanese, with their 4 carriers and their battle group, would lure the 3 remaining American carriers, which were still stationed at Pearl Harbor, into Midway. The Japanese would launch a swift fighter strike with their fighter bombers, to soften up the Midway defense, and then land a invasionary force that would engage the American troops on the island. Now, this is a very awesome tactic, because that would force the Americans to send their carriers, because the carriers are the only ships that they really have left, the only effective ones, to try and retake Midway, because the Americans couldn't survive without Midway in the Pacific. It would have taken them years to muster up enough force to take any of the Pacific islands back, and by that time the war would you know, wind down considerably. And so when the Americans moved in, the Japanese would have their battleship group come in at the same time, when the Americans thought they were going to engage a carrier group, when in reality they're going to engage a battleship group, and they couldn't survive against a battleship group. Battleships would have destroyed them utterly. And you know, it was an intelligent tactic. They're gonna lure you in with their prize ships, and when you think that, you know, you're in for an almost equal battle, then they're going to come up with, you know, their left hook and smack you right in the face. However, this didn't happen this way. The Americans had actually intercepted a communication telling them that Midway is going to be attacked. And what they decided to do was move to the northeast with their carriers a day before. While the Japanese carriers moved in, they sent out a few scouts. They weren't expecting anybody. The Americans sent out a whole bunch of scouts because they knew where they were looking for a Japanese carrier group. And when they found them, they knew they just had to attack. And so they started an attack with torpedo bombers. And these torpedo bombers weren't very effective. In fact, most of them got shot down really quickly. And American torpedoes suck anyway by that time. And so the element of surprise didn't exactly work out for the Americans at first. And the remaining American planes had to hobble back to their carriers. Then the Japanese found the lead carrier, the Yorktown, and dropped quite a bit of ordnance and scored a hit on the Yorktown. And they thought they'd killed the Yorktown. She was on fire and smoking, but in reality, the Yorktown was, you know, damaged. But the damage control crews on board were able to fix her up really quick, and she was back in the fight, you know, almost instantly. Which is a big difference between American carriers and Japanese carriers. It's not the armor, it was the crews. Our crews were designated as damage control crews. We had large ones that were trained to stop holes and you know, get water out of the compartments and seal up the ship and put out fires. In fact, we had other technologies that were just, you know, amazing for that job. We sent another attack force out with more torpedo bombers. And that didn't do anything. And back and forth, kept on doing this until finally we sent out our dive bombers. And our dive bombers had really skilled crews. And they proved to be far more effective than the torpedo bombers. In fact, they managed to sink all 4 Japanese carriers. The Akagi, the Kaga, the Sori, and the Hiru, all just decimated. And one of them fell to one bomb because they stuck all their fuel and munitions in the same place, which isn't a good idea. And we're going to learn from that with our carrier design. Really, at the Battle of Midway, the only thing that the United States lost, they lost one carrier, the Yorktown, which eventually got sunk by 2 torpedoes later, and 1 destroyer. Whereas the Japanese carrier navy was almost completely decimated. So we can learn a few things from this. One is armor really that important on a carrier? And how tough should the armor be? Should you have some sort of damage control system? And you can do damage control systems in Kerbal Space Program. And what type of carrier designs should we have? We're dealing with a ship that's going to be probably 140 tons or more. In Kerbal Space Program, it is very difficult to get 140 tons into orbit. Not impossible, it just lags like crazy, and it's a pain in the butt. However, there's another way that we can deal with this and kind of fix our problem with damage control. If you make your ship modular, and it has to be done very specifically, so it's sturdy enough, but if you make your ship modular, you don't have the problem of sending one massive, you know, ship into orbit. You're sending parts. Not to mention it's adaptable. If you need more fuel, you stick another fuel thing on there. If you need, you know, a different type of engine configuration, you can stick those on there. If you want to make your carrier a assault carrier and put drop troops, you know, and the drop pods on it, you can do that. So there's a lot of good things that you can do, not to mention if your carrier gets damaged, if the main section gets damaged and is killed, you still have 4 other sections that you can salvage from the wreck. If everything but your main section is destroyed, then you can salvage your main section. If your ship gets split in half, it's not that bad because you can take the center section, forget about the center section, and redock your ship to its engine compartments. I mean, it makes it a versatile craft. And this is better than heavy armor, and I'll tell you why. Heavy armor is heavy. It requires a lot more tons. You're going to have some armor on your main hangar section, because it encloses your hangar, which is also always a good idea. But don't put too much armor on your ship. It just weighs it down. Your part count goes way up, and your carrier, which you can make a super carrier without having to deal with that nasty part count. But your carrier just isn't nearly as effective if it's weighed down by that armor. Not to mention it's not as fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to use several different tactics. Of course, that damage control system we talked about by making it modular. Maneuverability. I don't put very much RCS on my big ships, specifically because I just put a whole bunch of SAS systems on there. Makes it very maneuverable. It also helps keep the ship itself as rigid as possible, because each individual section has an SAS on it. And then it helps keep the design. It's still flexible, but it stays intact. Also, keep in mind you're a mobile platform. You don't have to move into a battle. You design your fighters so that they move for you and they do the attacking for you. My Phoenix class heavy attack fighter is designed to be a long-range attack fighter or bomber. So let's go into the builder and get started. I'll show you one of the designs that I've done before. It's actually currently orbiting around my universe in Kerbal. Now this can go a little fast, but we're going to start with the first section. Command pod. You can really use any command pod. I like to use these ones because they're light, or at least lighter than most, about half the weight of the ones that hold 3, and they already hold 2 crew. You're going to need a center section, something that spreads it out. Now, I made mine, or my design is going to be a quad design. I'm going to have docking ports on top and the sides and the bottom. And this will allow me to, if everything works right, I'm going to have 8 fighters that I can use. And then a whole bunch of, minor support craft, probably 6 defense drones, and 2 droids that, move things in and out. I'm also going to have a lot of external ports for heavier attack craft that wouldn't normally fit in the hangar. It's also a good idea to put these hard points. I call them hard points. I know they're docking rings, but these hard points, because I usually attach weapons in my modular designs. I'm going to attach hard points to the edges. And what these hard points are for are my hangar armor plates. Now, this serves 2 purposes. One, I don't have to lift that into space with my main section. I'm going to lift them all separately. I think I can attach all 4 to one rocket. That'll probably weigh about 10-20 tons. This thing already weighs 25 to 30 tons. But another thing it allows me to do is it allows me to repair my ship if the armor gets damaged. And that's key. Being able to repair your ship in space is a very good advantage, because that means I don't have to add it again. I just have to do a little more work rather than launch the thing again. So here it is done. I've got my arrays on top, and there's a communications on bottom right there, and then the back here, that's where it's going to attach to the rest of the ship. And it's got 4 docking clamps, so it's pretty strong and sturdy. I do the next section here. Now I'm going to start with the RC -LO1, the remote guidance. I'm going to stick, of course, my docking ports on there so that I can attach to the Module A. This is going to be a fuel section and probably some power. Now, 4 at first I thought was going to be enough. I decided it's not. I'd rather this thing be wide than tall, so that I was going to go for 9. That is actually too much, so I decided on 6. And I'm trying to balance or center these things. You can see I've got some attachments to keep them sturdy, more docking ports because a unit that's similar to this one's going to attach to it. Unit C to Unit D and so forth. So I experimented with a few designs here. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do at first. It proved to be too heavy if I was to double it, so I decided to use it single. But I just wanted to make sure that there was enough space, because I was also going to put in SAS system. Because if you put SAS systems on each one, it keeps things balanced. So here I'm going to remove them and then fix the things. I was going to put some RCS in there, but decided not to. Just use the smaller tanks. Now each individual one of these things is going to have some RCS on it, because it's got to maneuver when I dock it. It's got to be pretty maneuverable, so I put quite a bit of RCS on the rocket unit. So, and this pretty much finishes off, Module B. I added another SAS system under there, So moving on to Module C, it's pretty much the same thing, except for it's a straight fuel can. And it's a two-sided, so I can stick more than one of these things on there if I wanted to. If I really wanted this carrier to be a fuel tanker, it could be. Really heavily defended fuel tanker, but still. And it's going to have its own rocket, and it's going to launch separately. And it's going to attach perfectly to the undersection. And here's Module D. I was going to put 4 engines on each section. Now I decided on only 3. 4 would be ridiculous, and it didn't really look right. So here I'm trying to fit stupid things on there. And we're dealing with 3 engines on 6 compartments. And, that's a lot of engines. It's 18 engines. And that's going to give a lot of thrust, even though I'm taking a lot of fuel up with me. Here's the finished rocket for the main section. It'll easily get into orbit. I've got a maneuvering section in the center that'll allow me to maneuver it wherever I want. And this section, when it's up, doesn't actually have to move. I'm docking things to it. That way, all the other sections can be the maneuverable ones. Here's section B. I'm using a asparagus style on all these rockets. I find it efficient and quick. I stick lots and lots of engines on the darn things. Keep sustainability up. And this is going to attach right to the back of Section A, or Module A. And on the bottom here, these are going to attach to Module C, which is a straight fuel tank. This is a fuel and power, and it's the connecting node that connects the ship to the rest of the engines and fuel. Module C, like I said, straight fuel. Carries quite a bit of fuel. I can carry multiple ones of these, so I could actually just carry a B and D and not have that much fuel and lighten it up, or I can carry C for much longer missions, or 2 Cs for even longer missions than that. Of course, you see some RCS tanks on there. Maneuverability, kind of important when you're docking the ship to the rest of the ship. So, and again, if I lose any sections of these in the battle, I don't have to worry. Even my engine section here looks similar to modules B through C. It's got fuel tanks on there, and they'll actually drain, because all I'm attaching them with are docking clamps. They'll actually drain fuel from module B first and move it all the way to module D, while module D burns. And it's, those 18 engines are going to allow me to move really fast. And I was considering putting them on types of action groups, but I don't have to, because all I have to do is vary the power output on them. So I told you I had one in orbit. There it is. It's almost 100,000 kilometers up, or meters up. The NCC Naval Commissioned Craft. 0007, so it's the 7th edition, called the Jennifer's Beauty. There it is. Took about 10 hours to get this thing up here. Originally, because I had to, redesign parts and fix parts, and I launched the first section, and then started, redesigning some of the sections originally. It's good to control it from here, because then you get the best orientation. So, you can tell I still have the rocket booster at the end of it. I'm going to get rid of that soon. Let's try and get rid of this thing here. This thing's fully fueled. RCS too. Although it doesn't carry very much RCS. Carries a whole hell of a lot of fuel though. Now I could just use this thing up as a booster and save some of my other fuel. But there's a lot of weight on here, and it really wouldn't make much difference, so get rid of it. And I'm going to fire these engines up for the very first time. Make sure it doesn't hit anything on its way out. Here we go. Sorry for the lag. The part count is actually pretty low for its size. Checking the orbits off by almost 2,000. Probably because all the docking, but. There we go. All my fuel. That's a lot of fuel. 15,000. Two crewmen so far. And the weight. Holy crap, that's a lot of tons. And the part count. Mid 300s. It's not bad. It's not bad at all, actually, for the size. It will be carrying 8 fighters, so but that won't be too bad. Next time we're going to do fighters and drones, maybe some bombers if we have time. But that's it. That's Jennifer's Beauty. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you liked it. And this is KSP Naval Academy, Camulus 777. Have a good night.